Wouldn't it be weird if the leaves turned like other colors? Do you think fall would be as awesome if the leaves turned like blue
Hot
or
pink.
or hot pink?
That'd be sick.
Or would it be like better?
It'd be so much better.
Would it?
What if
Or would
they
it be
were
like weird?
neon?
I feel
No,
like it wouldn't even look real.
what if it was glow in the dark because it gets dark out so early?
Oh yeah, like 2:30, it's dark already.
That would be
You
sick.
have a path of blue and fluorescent pink leaves to guide you home.
I feel like it's like that near the power plant.
Which is right around the corner.
33, 1, 0. Main event of the evening. Wednesday and half past the hour.
It's Tuesday, and you're listening to Murder Unscripted.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to another installment of Murder Unscripted. I'm your host, Ed Hydock, along with my co-host, a woman more sewn together than Frankenstein, Melissa Spivey.
I wish I had a witty retort, but like you're not wrong. So like I just have to let that one go and say you won this round.
Notice I'm starting to write the intro, so it's not the beautiful,
Yeah.
breathtaking
It's
Melissa
lame.
Spivey. Well, by this point, we are halfway through October, and we've been diving into some real life cases that either inspired a scary movie or a scary movie that inspired a real life crime. And today is no different because this one is a biggie. So strap in for a tale as old as time, the murderous rampage of Lizzie Borden and the real life crime that it inspired.
I feel like Lizzie was like the original episode of Snapped.
Yeah, I mean,
Right?
technically, kind
She
of.
snapped.
She snapped.
I know it's been done like a million times, but it is such an interesting case. Do you think Lizzie did it? Or are you going to go over that?
I think she did it. I do. But I don't think she did it alone.
I think Maggie helped, the maid.
I do too. Because this story is so well known, I'm just going to kind of cover it in broad strokes. One, to make sure our listeners have some context when we cover the case that it inspired. And two, because the case that it inspired actually might be more intriguing than Lizzie's story itself.
I had never heard of this case, and I like specifically did not Google it like I usually do because you know I don't
Good.
like surprises.
I know, and I like to surprise you with facts, so to see how you react.
And I hate it.
Well, this one we have to go way back, and we're not even going to step in the time machine this time. We're just going to jump back because I don't know why. We're just not.
Because I couldn't find any exciting facts about 1860.
Yeah,
like,
what happens
there
in
were
1860?
cows. The hell do you want me to say?
That's it. So for this case, we need to go all the way back to 1860, specifically July 19th, when Lizzie Andrew Borden was born to Sarah Anthony Borden and Andrew Jackson Borden in Fall River, Massachusetts. Lizzie also had a sister, Emma, who was 9 years older than her. The Bordens, they lived a very modest lifestyle, and Andrew, he began to prosper in the furniture and casket making business. He eventually went on to become a successful property developer, director of several textile mills, and owned considerable commercial property. So this guy actually had it made. For where he came from, he actually made a pretty good name for himself.
I mean, the casket business, that's brilliant. People are always going to need them.
That's true. Job security is no joke.
Seriously.
So Andrew was also the president of the Union Savings Bank and the director of Durfee Safe Deposit and Trust Company. So at the time of his murder, his estate was valued at $300,000. And I looked it up today, and that's about $10 million. So yeah, he was loaded for back then. I mean, I considered loaded, I guess, in 1860. But Andrew Borden had serious John List vibes. Like the second I started really researching this case, it was like, man, is this John List or what? Like one of these guys, despite his wealth, he was incredibly frugal, boring, plain, bland, like stick in the mud.
All right, in his defense, it was the 1800s. Like, what was he going to do that was fun?
I don't know. You said they
Cow
were cows.
tip?
Yeah, I don't think cow tipping was around back then. I could be wrong.
Maybe he started it.
Maybe. So in 1863, Lizzie's mother, Sarah, passes away and Andrew eventually remarries. So now Lizzie and Emma have a stepmom named Abby, who they believed only married Andrew for his money.
Good for her. Ain't no shame in that gold digger thing. Like, get
I
it, girl.
guess.
I love it.
I just think it's hard to believe that it happened back. I guess it would happen no matter what era you're in. People like money.
Since day one. Men
Absolutely.
are stupid and women are like, shit, I'll take advantage of this.
And women like shoes. So
Exactly.
So while the family's relationship remained not great, but cordial, there were definitely tensions festering behind closed doors. And most of these fights stemmed from Andrew's generous gifting of real estate to Abby's family. So his new wife, he's giving away properties. Swear to God, like it's Oprah. It's like, you get a property and you get a property. Everybody was getting properties except the girls in the house. So Emma and Lizzie were kind of forced to live in this house, which didn't even have working plumbing. And that's a testament to how frugal Andrew was. They did have enough to have a maid. Her name was Bridget Sullivan, and she was an Irish immigrant that everyone referred to as Maggie. So when you see her name pop up in articles, it's usually Maggie Sullivan. So fast forward to 1892, and this is when things really start to bubble over. Lizzie had been very attached to some pigeons that were living in her father's barn. She even built them a roost. And then one day in May of 1892, Andrew killed the pigeons with a hatchet because he thought that they were attracting local children who wanted to come to his property and hunt them. So he was really just trying to keep the damn kids off my lawn. But these were like Lizzie's babies. So
well, that's sad. That's traumatizing as
it
F,
is.
I feel like.
It is. And she was devastated and like angry too. That started a big kind of like, she had this I don't know, what's the word?
I want to say an axe to grind, but I feel like that's poor taste in her case. Shit.
It's actually perfect. That is a perfect.
Like, an axe
Lizzie
to grind,
really
like,
had an axe to grind.
Shit, she did though.
So then in late July, early August of 1892, the entire family got violently ill. And because Andrew was so kind of unpopular around town with his peers, all of the family members and some local townsfolk believed that the family was poisoned. But it was later determined that it was food poisoning because they had left some mutton on the stove and just kept eating it for several days.
That skeeves me out so much. Like mutton and just the fact that it was left out. Like, I can't. That's disgusting.
I know. I feel like my kid does that too. It's like that pizza's been sitting on the stove for. It's like, just grab a slice. Wake up, grab a slice. That's no mutton. So on Thursday morning, August 4th, 1892, Andrew Borden leaves home to conduct some business. There's mixed reports where he was conducting business. He was running some errands. So that's kind of unknown where he went, but he did leave the house. So left in the house was Maggie the maid, Abby, and Lizzie. Emma was, she was visiting a friend, so she wasn't at the house. So Andrew returns home sometime in the morning, I think about 10 a.m., and he settles on the couch for a nap. See, so even in 1892, work makes you need a morning nap.
Oh, I feel that.
He was burned out. So then at 11:10 a.m., Lizzie, and this is according to her testimony, her later, we're skipping ahead in the story, but this is according to what she told police. She came downstairs and found her father dead on the couch. And we're not talking just he had a heart attack. He was brutally murdered with a sharp instrument. There was blood everywhere. And she immediately hollers to Maggie, the maid, who was upstairs on the third floor. She was kind of resting. So this is what Lizzie then said. She was like, Maggie, come quick. Father's dead. Someone came in and killed him. And sure enough, Andrew is slumped on the couch in the downstairs sitting room. He'd been struck 10 to 11 times with a hatchet-like weapon. His head was basically split in half. There's a picture, if I can find it, of his skull. It's just missing. There's a huge chunk missing. I've never seen anything like it.
Wow.
So police are called, and one of the first questions they ask is, where's Abby? And Lizzie tells him, oh, she received a summons, which I guess was like a letter, to go visit a sick friend. Yeah, like a telegram to go visit a sick friend. And she's not sure if she's back yet or not. Maybe she's upstairs. I don't know. I've been just hanging out in my room. And sure enough, they go to look for Abby, and they find her in an upstairs guest room, slaughtered worse than Andrew had been on the couch downstairs. So they do an autopsy, and the medical examiner figures out that she had initially been struck from behind with a hatchet or an axe, and then she turned to face her attacker, and then she was struck another 17 times.
Wow.
So someone crept up, hit her in the back, and pow, pow. Then when she turned, so it was violent.
That's overkill. Like,
Absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely. And interestingly enough, the medical examiner determined Abby was killed roughly 2 hours before Andrew. So this is where things get a little hairy in the investigation, because you got these people in the house and this violent murder occurs, and it's like, how do y'all not know anything?
Yeah.
So his body was still warm when they discovered it, and his wounds were still like oozing blood. So I mean, this was a fresh murder. They had just missed the killer. Just missed the killer.
Hint,
You
hint,
know?
wink, wink. Yeah.
Yeah. Investigators would later find an axe in the basement of the Borden home, but it looked like somebody had cleaned it off. So there was nothing really, even in 92, there wasn't a lot of evidence on this axe. So police were immediately put off by Lizzie's demeanor, her cold and callousness. And there were some inconsistencies in her story too. And in addition, once Lizzie was told that she was a suspect, this family friend, Alice Russell, found Lizzie ripping up one of her dresses and burning it, saying it was covered in paint. Eventually, on August 11th, a week after the murders, Lizzie was arrested and charged.
Can I just say it's wild that even now, like 200 and plus years later, we're still judging people on their demeanor during trauma. They didn't like her demeanor.
That's true. That's a good point. Like but that's part of there's a science behind that.
Yeah, and I get
Our bodies
that.
tell stories, you know? In June of 1893, Lizzie stood trial behind a not guilty plea. And amazingly, she was acquitted of all charges based on the fact that there really was no physical evidence connecting her to the crime. But despite getting off, the town ostracized her. Like, she ended up having to change her name to Lisbeth B. Borden.
I feel like she could have done something a little bit better. Like,
I'm not Lizzie anymore. I'm Lisbeth.
Oh, well, totally someone different.
Oh, not Lizzie Borden then. So she went on to become really successful, actually, and she stayed in Fall River up until her death from pneumonia in 1927. But the legend of Lizzie Borden will live in infamy as one of the most prolific murder stories ever told. I should also mention that the house where this all happened is now a bed and breakfast. Like, you can go on and book a room. They're so far out, though, in October, they fill up so quick. So like, if you want to stay, book now for next October. And I actually, back in 2017, stayed there, and it is creep-tastic, like, in the best way possible. So I could not recommend this more. They give you a ton of history. They talk about Lizzie's story. They take you to all the places where these things happen. You can stay in the rooms where these things happened.
That's so
And
cool.
they even let you do paranormal investigations. They'll give you instruments and let you sit up in the basement all night and take pictures. It's wild. And fun story. So when I had stayed there with some friends, we had partaken in some of the devil's lettuce.
Clutching my pearls.
We're just walking around Fall River, and they're just hanging out in town. And we come back then to the B&B, and everybody else went to bed. So I wandered down to the kitchen.
Of course you did.
And I'm like, I'm looking for snacks in the refrigerator, and I kind of did one of these, like, I'm like rooting through, and there's all these like leftovers and food for the next day. And then, like,
Was there any mutton?
there was no mutton.
Okay,
There was
just
no
checking.
mutton. So, but at one point it hit me that, like, the warm glow of the refrigerator, I'm just sitting there looking at all this food and going, I am literally stoned out of my mind in Lizzie Borden's house, rummaging through her refrigerator. Like, where am I? What is happening right now?
I feel like the only other cases that I can think that of, like, are as big as Lizzie is like Jack the Ripper and H.H. Holmes.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there aren't, I don't know, I don't think there are many cases that span such a crazy time period and are still as prevalent in people's memory banks. Like, you say Lizzie Borden, and people just, they know the case, they know the facts. And maybe it's because of that nursery rhyme that you've heard over and over and over and over again.
Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks, and when she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41.
That's exactly right. That's it. But look, I mean, the numbers, like, nobody hit anybody 41 times.
Yeah, well, 17 times doesn't rhyme.
It didn't rhyme. I know.
Yeah.
So did you know there's an actual, like, a lesser known second verse?
I did not.
Really? Well, here, hold on. I have it. Andrew Borden is now dead. Lizzie hit him on the head. Up in heaven he will sing. On the gallows she will swing. Creepy, right?
Okay. All of the nursery rhymes, though, are like macabre as F. Like, the ring around the rosy pocket full of, like, that's so
It's about the
morbid.
plague, isn't it? That's about the plague.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They are all creepy. They are.
I mean, I love it. If I ever had a kid, I'd sing that on the gallows. I mean,
That's good.
way to put your kid to sleep. Like, that's great.
Oh, he'll
So
sleep all right.
calming, soothing.
I'd be terrified to sleep.
To be fair, though, I fall asleep with, like, Forensic Files on, so how is that any different?
Well, that's true. That's true. So, and I will say that the television adaptations range from accurate retellings, documentaries, to like complete pure fiction. And for example, in 2018, a feature film called Lizzie was released, where Chloe Sevigny played Lizzie and Kristen Stewart of Twilight fame played Maggie, the maid. And it depicted a lesbian tryst between the two, which in the movies leads to murder. It's a story that's absolutely taken on a life of its own over time.
Do we think there's any truth to that, though? Like, maybe Lizzie and Maggie were hooking up?
I do not think that at all. Maybe I do now that you say it. So one of the things, maybe I'm just picturing it. Maybe there's a very good difference between like, did it happen or like, did it happen? So in 2014, Lifetime produced Lizzie Borden Took an Axe with the amazingly beautiful raven-haired Christina Ricci playing
Oh,
Lizzie.
what a goddess.
I know. And they followed that up with the Lizzie Borden Chronicles in 2015, which was basically a fictionalized sequel that followed Lizzie's life after the trial. But for our purposes, I want to focus on the 1975 adaptation called The Legend of Lizzie Borden. And this was starring another fantastic actress, Elizabeth Montgomery. And that's going to be the focus today because it was that television series that inspired and absolutely captivated a man named James Cushing in 1990. So buckle in for the story of the Queen Anne axe murderer inspired by the legend of Lizzie Borden.
Ooh, I'm excited. I mean, how could you know with the Queen Anne axe murderer? But there we go again, giving serial killers cool names.
I know.
So
It just gives them
stupid.
the notoriety they're looking for. But-
Exactly.
So I do want to preface this by saying this case teeters on the line between mental health and cold-blooded evil. And that's something I brought up last week, that this was going to do that. So I'm going to tread lightly in some areas because I'm not even sure how I feel. And every time I think about it, my feelings change. But we've talked about this before. People understand right from wrong. And while it may be tragic that someone mentally ill was responsible for these crimes, it does not excuse any of the actions that I'm about to discuss. James William Cushing was born in 1953 in the Seattle, Washington area. James's life was doomed from the start. When James's mother was pregnant with him, she contracted German measles, which damaged James's brain. Then, when he was born, James was diagnosed with spinal meningitis, which is an infection of the fluid and the membranes kind of surrounding the brain and the brain stem and the spinal cords. And that disease can severely damage the nervous system, cognitive abilities, memory loss, behavioral changes. It causes all these things, just to name a few of the more like serious side effects. So despite all of these hurdles, James grew into a lovable, affectionate child, despite doctors basically telling his parents that James had zero chance of a normal life.
I wonder if James, like, knew that doctors said that about him. Like, if he already felt like he was set up to fail, like, why bother trying later? Like, if someone tells you over and over that you can't do something, you're either going to get pumped up to prove them wrong, or you're going to believe that you can't do it.
I don't know, but you don't know if his parents treated him differently knowing that, if that was in the back of their mind. So, and get this, I mean, despite James having some developmental problems, he was by all accounts a really good kid. And unfortunately, those issues that he had, they were tough on his dad, who at one point, there was some argument, I don't know what happened, but he hit him and he hit him hard. And I think dad, that kind of set something off in dad and he just left. So it's kind of sad. James was 7 years old at the time.
Dad hit James or James hit dad?
Dad hit James. And I think he felt something. He's like, I don't love this kid the way I need to love this kid. And he left. So
Jesus, on top of everything else, now we can add like abandonment issues to this kid's list of issues.
So the story actually gets a lot sadder because James's mother had two other kind of quote unquote normal daughters to raise. So while she did love James dearly, she knew she couldn't handle James and the way he was alone. So she sent James to live in a series of group homes for the mentally disabled. James shined and made some great friends with the staff, with other kids who were in these homes. But over time, a dark side was kind of bubbling under the surface, and a hidden rage was growing inside of James. I checked this out because I was curious about it, and so many reputable sources say that routine and stability is so important in mentally ill people. Needless to say, stability was not going on in James's life because he was bouncing between these group homes and watching the people around him constantly change between the friends coming and going. Different homes had different staff members. And eventually, all of these feelings come to a head when James decides he can't handle any more change. So he starts acting out. And it starts smallish. So on several occasions, he sets a couple little fires in some abandoned sheds. He smashes windows, like vandalism.
Remember when you were about 13, you told me that you had some trouble with a man in the neighborhood?
Yeah, I walked into his home. He had his whole couch, drapes, pillows were on fire.
What for?
I was upset.
So you can start to see some of these things creeping up that we see in some of the more infamous serial killers as well. And it should be noted that one of the fires that James set actually led to an arson charge, and his fingerprints were entered into the system, which is important for later in our story.
Well, setting fires and animal cruelty, that's 2/3 of the McDonald triad, which, like, we've talked about before.
Yes.
Was he a bedwetter? I feel like he was. He looks
think
like
he-
a bedwetter.
He does look like a bedwetter.
He
I mean, I would
does
think
look like
so.
a bedwetter.
And I hate to be that person, but yeah, I wouldn't surprise me.
And you know what? I feel like all this change and instability is also adding to that feeling of abandonment from his dad.
Absolutely. And what makes matters worse is that he finds that he's not welcome in some of these homes anymore because of these problems that he's been having. So before long, James is on the streets. He chooses to go homeless.
Yeah, and that's really not good for someone with, issues, because then he's not medicated. Or if he is, it's probably not regularly or the correct dosage. And not to mention, this kid already has stability issues like we've talked about. So now he's going to be even angrier at the world.
Totally. And the one thing that's kind of important to know is his mom was kind of his like guardian still, even though he was homeless. So he had no access to money. I mean, his mom was really tight. Like when he would swing by to pick up a couple things, she would give him a couple bucks, but like he didn't have immediate access to funds. So things were tough. And he absolutely resented not having a permanent home or a family anymore. And he'd been reduced to basically begging for food and spare change, which only left him angrier. People would walk right by him. People would push him to the ground. I mean, he was treated like an animal, which was awful. And eventually his mom found him and brought him back in. But when she brought him back in, he wasn't the same sweet boy that she had raised as a child. He had completely changed. He basically lives on the couch all day. He's a total slob. He's talking to himself and laughing to himself. So you could start to see signs of psychosis too. And just living in his own filth. And it was clear he needed help. But I guess mom was, I don't know, I guess she was doing her best. I don't know. I don't know.
This is so hard. I think it can be hard for a parent to admit that their child is maybe not okay. Either she was ignoring the situation, hoping it would go away, or she was doing her best. I'm not quite sure, which I don't blame her for either one.
I agree. And remember I said earlier that James was obsessed with The Legend of Lizzie Borden, that 1975 miniseries. So I want to get into some of the similarities between the cases, which is a nod to a show called Copycat Killers, which was on the network Reels. And they made a series out of telling stories exactly the way like we're telling them in this block. And it just happened to coincide with Halloween. So we just did spooky stories.
There's a Copycat Killers episode on my Slender Man case too.
There certainly is. So you should check it out. You can still find it. They have a podcast too. I think it's just they just retell.
Yeah, they
stories.
do. Yep. You can find that wherever you're listening to this, and you can find Reels. I watched it somewhere online. I just Googled.
Yeah, I don't think it's real protected. You can just kind of find it.
Yeah.
So I want to get into the similarities between the two cases. When Lizzie Borden was arrested, she was 32. James is 36. They both lost a parent because remember when Lizzie's mom died when she was young and James's dad left the house when he was 7. So they had that in common. Lizzie hated her parents for causing that instability in the home because remember, the dad was giving money and properties out to everybody, controlling the family finances. And James felt like a prisoner as well because his mom also controlled his money. So he was still angry at his mom for kicking him out of the house. While Lizzie saw her parents as a problem that needed fixing, all of a sudden, James has just been inspired to follow in her footsteps.
Of all the horrific murderers over the years, especially at this time, because like Ted Bundy wasn't that long ago. I think Dahmer was going on at this point. Like, I don't know. I wouldn't want to emulate any of them, but like Lizzie Borden would not be high on my list, I feel like.
Well, you know what? It might. So you have a mentally ill person and you
Yeah.
have someone who just watched a TV show. And yeah, it was 15 years old at this point, but maybe he just saw it. Maybe it was a rerun or something. But,
Yeah.
and he was like obsessed with this show. So I think it was it was kind of like Slenderman, where these kids got obsessed and they went down this rabbit hole. That's how this guy felt about Lizzie Borden. So
Wow.
it's just wild. And things start really small. So when James's mom leaves the house one day, he trashes the place, trashes it. He throws garbage on the floor. He slashes the fabric on all the furniture, and he was breaking windows, and he even smeared feces on the wall of her house. And I'm not really sure what he was trying to accomplish with that by that acting out, but it landed him in another mental health facility for 14 days. And it's during this time that James gets his very first urge to kill. So on the night of February 13th, 1990, after his mom is sound asleep, James finds a tool bag and he starts rooting through it, looking for some kind of weapon. He finds hammers, screwdrivers, these sharp chisels, and eventually he finds a large carving knife and he takes it out. He tiptoes up to his mom's bedside. He takes this knife and he's standing over top of his mom and he's aiming right for her skull, just like Lizzie Borden and her axe. But just as he's ready to strike, his mom wakes up and she immediately starts panicking, and James doesn't, though. And that's the creepiest part, is she's freaking out and he's just standing there and he goes, "Hi."
Okay, that's the most terrifying thing I've ever heard.
Why are you laughing then?
Because I'm stressed out about it. I laugh when I get nervous, and this is really making me anxious.
Do me a favor. If someone is above your bed raising a knife and there's the shadow, like, don't just start laughing.
I probably would, because I wouldn't know what else to do.
You're going to get stabbed. Oh my God, Melissa. So mom, she yells, she lets out this yell and manages to scare James out of the door, but not before he just pees on her bed and then goes back to his room and goes back to bed. Like he's just laughing to himself and then falls back asleep. It was a very strange encounter. So the next morning, obviously mom's rattled. So she wakes up and she begs several state agencies and courts to just help James. But no help is granted because of the stuff he'd already done in the system and some of the crimes he'd committed. So even after several visits to mental health professionals, James, he's getting worse. And he's beginning to hear voices.
This reminds me of Cosmo DiNardo.
A little bit, right?
From Block 2, and like his mom being like, remember when she was at the doctor's office? That guy who's still practicing. And she was like, "He's going to kill me." And the doctor's like, "It's cool. Have a good one."
No, he won't. You're fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is, we'll talk about this at the very end of the story, but there's so much more to say about the whole situation with James. So things are obviously getting worse for James right now. He's starting to hear voices in his head, and these voices are telling him to do some pretty violent things. It's no longer just rubbing shit on the walls and breaking windows. He's thinking about killing. So at one point, he's ordered to stay away from his mom for 90 days. And that's when the voices become louder. They become more frequent. And James at this point feels like he has nothing to lose. And that's when he lets the voices convince him to perform a violent stunt at the end of that summer.
Was he just out on the streets?
I think so. And he was dangerous, though. That's the problem. And mom was scared of him. And I don't blame her one bit.
No, I don't blame her. But to be like, you can't go back to your house. You can't be with your mom for 90 days, but we're not going to put you anywhere else. Like, it's
a double-edged sword. I mean, he's done these things that made no one want to take him in. But at the same time, how do you leave him unattended like that? You know how dangerous he is.
Such a system failure.
It really is. So in August, James visits the local park. And as soon as he arrives, he pulls out a switchblade that he had acquired somewhere, and he starts waving it in the air and screaming. He's making a complete scene, and everyone just starts running. But James manages to corner a woman, threatening to kill her. And when she's close enough to stab her, a man who was at the park stopped him, which gave the woman enough time to run away. So right then and there, James is detained and sent to another medical health facility, and he needs a psychiatric evaluation. But again, he's released back onto the streets in no time. And it's so crazy to me that no one is understanding what this guy is capable of if he's left alone.
How could people not see that?
I don't know. I really don't. But if they had, maybe there'd be some people who don't die. And we're
Yeah.
about to learn about some of them. So he's released back onto the streets, and this makes him angry that he wasn't able to kill anyone. It wasn't the fact that he was back on the streets. It's like he was a failure. These voices are telling him to do it, and he couldn't do it.
Oh.
So the very same day he's released, James tries again. He picks up yet another switchblade from a local hardware store, and he enters a shopping center with it. And once inside, these voices start taking over, and he's encouraged to attack someone, but anyone, like the first person he sees. And as he's like picking his target, a security guard sees him with his knife in his hand and confiscates the knife, kicks James out of the store. And man, if you think James wasn't pissed before.
Well, on that particular night, was there something that got you upset so the voices were worse than normal?
Yeah, black guard over in Wesley.
You got some problems with a guard over at the Westlake Mall?
I'm going to say it again. This is just such a failure by the system, like over and over and over again. So many red flags. These red flags are on fire.
Well, now you got this guy walking through this quiet neighborhood and with all these thoughts and voices in his head. So no joke, he walks up to the first house he sees and tries the door. And this is the part that started to scare me, because these people are out there. Like,
Yeah.
obviously things have come a long way since 1990 with Ring cameras and stuff, but he literally just starts looking for houses, pick ones he like, and try the doorknob. So he finds this house, and the door he tried belonged to the DeBarros family, and it's unlocked. So James walks inside, and it appears the owner is asleep. So he checks the place out. He wanders through the house, like gets the lay of the land, and then walks out the back door. And what does he find? An axe.
Oh my God. Lock your damn doors, people. MUPSA. Lock your
Right.
damn doors.
Especially when you're sleeping.
Right?
Right? Oh man. But this could have been one of those neighborhoods, that just we
Where
never
no
locked our
one
door.
locks their door.
So now James has this axe, and he's taking his time. He's walking through the house, plotting. He even stops to eat some fruit on the counter. And suddenly the homeowner kind of stirs upstairs, and James panics. So he drops the axe right there on the floor, and he flees out of the house. And the homeowner immediately finds this axe and calls police.
This guy's like such a dichotomy. Like, he waltzes into a house with like no fear of what could be in that house on the other side of that door. He eats their food, he wanders around, but then he gets scared at the drop of a hat. And like the security guard's stopping him. And it's like he's one of those people who like talks a big ass game, but then like wimps out.
It's
Like, I
very,
just don't
yeah.
understand how you can be like that nonchalant about walking into a house, but then you hear a noise and you're like, ah!
I think it's maybe the fear of confrontation. Like, he had these
Yeah.
ideas in his head and this tough guy persona, especially he's amped up from watching Lizzie Borden do this. And now all of a sudden he's in her shoes and everything's fine until it involves another person. And then it's like he gets scared. So I don't know.
Well,
But-
now that you say that, like, that even reminds me of like when he was standing over his mom. Like, had she not woken up, there would have been no confrontation. And then she woke up and he like panicked and was like, oh, hey. Like,
yeah.
So I feel like you're right. It's like he wants to be this big, scary dude, but then he can't actually handle the confrontation.
Exactly. Police dust this axe for fingerprints, but don't find any. And they essentially give the axe back to the homeowner, who's rattled at this point. And the
Fair.
homeowner, I think it was in a shed out back, but the homeowner took it and put it back outside where it was stored. He's like, yeah, that was weird. Throws it back out in the shed. And meanwhile, James is still walking around. He can't stop thinking about this axe. It was the closest he'd gotten to becoming Lizzie Borden and getting revenge the way she did, So what does he do? He waits a few nights and he goes back to the property and into the shed and gets the axe again.
Like,
Wild.
The homeowner didn't learn a lesson? Lock that shit up.
He's like, you know what? That was strange, but it can't happen twice, could it?
Oh my God.
I know. Insane. So I want to jump ahead a few weeks to March 11th, 1990. And 63-year-old Geneva McDonald is a lovely secretary for a marine construction firm. She's divorced, she lives alone, and although she has a 25-year-old daughter, her garden is her pride and joy. And that's what everybody in this little town of Queen Anne, it's a little town in Seattle, very quaint. That's what everybody knows her for, is her garden. That evening, Geneva turns in at her usual time, but what she doesn't know is that James Cushing is lurking outside her home with an axe, looking for any open door he can find.
What made you pick Geneva's house? I don't know, it just was there.
Isn't that scary? Like, my house is
Horrifying.
just there. Your house is just there. Like,
Mhm.
everybody's house is just there.
Right. And that's why these things are so scary to me. So James enters Geneva's home, creeps upstairs to her bedroom, and stands over her, just like he did his mom. And in his later interrogation, James would be asked, like, what were you thinking in that moment?
They don't lock the door, so you just walk in. You don't even have to break a window.
What did you do once you were in there, Jim?
Walked upstairs.
What side of the bed were you?
This side. She was on the side. Just said, Jesus Christ, I got excited. Just the axe. She took it off my head. Wham! Hit her right in the face. Right with the axe. About 4 or 5 times till the blood started coming out.
Where did it start coming out?
Her face.
Did you see it?
Oh, yeah.
Do you think that James either believed that he was attacking his mom or like imagining he was using Geneva as like a proxy for his mom, like taking that anger out, or maybe the voices in his head were making him think it really was his mother?
That's an interesting point. I mean, the only thing I can think of is that because he was so obsessed with Lizzie Borden, like it would make sense.
Right.
Or maybe he's picturing that security guard who like confiscated his knife and threw him out, or the dude at the park who stopped him.
Yeah.
You know, like whatever the case, I believe he needed to feel in control for the first time, and that's the one element of this that it's been lacking. Someone else has always stopped him from doing what he wanted to do. So after the attack, James drops the axe right there. And despite all the blood, he's not sure if Geneva is alive or dead. So what he does is he grabs some scissors that she had on her dresser or her nightstand and begins stabbing her in the chest repeatedly. So when he's finally sure that the job is done, James helps himself to $25 out of Geneva's purse and he heads downstairs. He actually grabs some cereal and a banana and then like sleeps on Geneva's couch for the night. So she's upstairs horrifically murdered and he's exhausted and just going to sleep it off downstairs. Like ballsy.
Yeah, he is clearly not in his right mind, but again, he has no idea who else could be in that house or who could be coming home at any point. Like he's clearly not thinking what happens next. Like he's purely in the moment. Like I don't feel like he can think ahead right now.
Well, and the other thing that struck me was that the things he's doing is very childlike. Like, I'm gonna have a bowl of cereal and sleep on the couch. Like it seemed like there was an innocent element to this.
Maybe like a regression kind of thing, doing things we're happy.
Yeah.
Like when
Could
he was
very
a
well be.
quote unquote good kid.
Yeah. Well, whatever the case, James stays the night and he leaves in the morning. So 2 days later, Geneva's coworkers are worried about her, obviously, and they send someone to do a welfare check, and that's when they make the gruesome discovery.
The 63-year-old murder victim's body was discovered in the bedroom of her Queen Anne Hill home. Police say the killer bludgeoned her with the axe and stabbed her with scissors.
So police arrive and they begin combing the house for clues, and they confirm it's the same axe that was taken from another resident in the neighborhood a few days earlier. And they also discover a palm print on Geneva's bedroom door, a thumbprint on her sewing machine, and a single hair on a pillow in her spare bedroom upstairs. So we know it's James's hair and prints. We're not going to pretend like it's not. But in the real story, they're forced to wait for DNA results and fingerprint results. Like things aren't lightning quick like they are now. And they're still not lightning quick, but they're way quicker than they were in 1990. Some departments didn't have this kind of capability. They didn't have the money for this kind of stuff. So it did not happen overnight. So until then, the Queen Anne neighborhood is crippled with fear. So 2 months pass with no movement because remember, from a scientific standpoint, this is 1990. And in addition, this was a random crime, which are notoriously the toughest to solve. So as police work to crack the case, James is hiding out in Tacoma, which is about 35 miles away from Seattle. And he tries his best to remain undetected, but his emotions and the voices in his head are they're getting out of control. Couple that with the fact that he also needed money. So he came close to committing suicide. He was on a bridge ready to jump, and before, like seconds before he was ready to leap to his death, he's like, "You know what? I'm not done. I'm going back to Queen Anne and I'm going to steal more money. I'm going to take more food and I'm going to create more chaos." Plus, he hopes that killing more people will make these voices in his head just go away. Like that's what we're talking about here.
It's interesting that he has moments of like clarity when he feels bad.
Yeah, it is very strange. And I can't figure him out because he's definitely a
Yeah.
violent predator, but at the same time, there's certain things about him that just don't add up. So let's jump ahead a few months more to June 17th, 1990. So James is walking around Queen Anne, once again just looking for an open door. But this time he's toting another switchblade, which he acquired somewhere. There must be a switchblade vending machine somewhere because this dude can pump out switchblades. So he enters another home and encounters an older gentleman named Ian Warren. And Ian is not the homeowner, but he was sleeping he was staying over at a buddy's house. He was actually in an upstairs bedroom. So just as Ian is drifting off to sleep, he sees a figure appear over top of him in the shadows. It's James.
Oh, it's exactly like he was standing over his mother, and I'm just imagining it, and I'm laughing again because I'm so anxious about that. Like the thought of waking up in the middle of the night in your bed and seeing someone standing over you.
Dude, I see a coat rack that looks funny, and I'm like, oh, like in
Exactly,
the
like,
shadows.
I'm like just imagining it, and it's terrifying.
Right? It doesn't get any creepier. So
No.
this was clearly the way James felt the most powerful. He pins Ian to the bed and begins slashing at this guy. He cut his left hand twice, and he must have hit something because it was a bloody, for just having left hand injuries, this was a very bloody incident. And I'll let James tell you in his own words how he felt during this encounter.
Were you trying to kill him? Who told you to do that?
Voices.
After he got his hand hurt, though, was there a lot of noise then?
Yeah, he was screaming.
What was he screaming?
Blood.
Did you take anything in that house?
No, I just took off.
And I don't know if it was like, oh, cool, now Ian's gonna fight back, so I better run or what. But Ian called the cops, and the second they arrived, they realized that Queen Anne axe murder is back in town. In fact, that's what the media ends up labeling him.
I wonder if he enjoyed that. Like back to giving serial killers cool nicknames. Like I wonder if he was starting to like the publicity and the rush he was getting maybe from committing the crimes. Like, he started with smaller things, starting fires, and it gradually worked up because it's like with drugs. You start with a small amount and then you stop getting that high, so you have to go up to the next dose. So,
Yep. Absolutely. And it's 100% what's driving him at this point. And for the first time, he's making a name for himself, just like Lizzie Borden did. So he's literally getting off on the attention.
Yeah.
And I know that's true because for the next few months, as police are trying to crack this case, James continues breaking into homes and looking for victims. On July 5th, James breaks into the home of the Lewises, who they live just around the corner from Geneva MacDonald, the woman he annihilated back in February. And luckily, the woman of the house, Mrs. Lewis, happened to be walking by the window when she saw someone breaking in. And this was late at night. It was like rare that someone would be up, but she just happened to be awake. So she peers out the window and she sees James looking back the other side.
Oh.
So she got a glimpse of him and she called police immediately to file a report. So then on July 15th, a West Seattle home belonging to the Durses is victimized by James, only this time none of the Durses were involved, thank God. Instead, they awoke to find their living room littered with vulgar, obscene messages scrawled on the walls. And Dawn, cover your ears. I'm sorry.
Uh-oh.
Fuck you, Seattle. Kiss my ass, bitch. The killer is back. And goodbye, bitch. Just scrawled on your walls. Could you even imagine? Wow. And there was another axe sitting on the floor. And police are again notified. But Melissa, what do you make of this development? Like, if he's out for blood, why leave those cryptic messages?
Clearly I'm no psychologist, but I wonder if maybe the voices he was hearing in his head were different people, and like he was writing like that, like all the different things he was writing were things that they were saying.
Maybe. Could
But
very well be.
I was also thinking about with his like the childlike behavior. it's like when a kid does something wrong, they're not upset about it until they get in trouble for it.
Mhm.
And I feel like that's how he is. Like, he's not upset about breaking into someone's house until he's about to get caught. And then all of a
Yeah.
sudden, he's like upset about it. So you're right. I feel like there's something very childlike about him. Like,
Yeah, I
maybe
agree.
he's mentally stunted at being X amount years old.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of what I'm thinking too, based on just what
Yeah.
I've learned about the story. So, needless to say, the Queen Anne neighborhood is rocked to their cores, but they go on the defense, which is awesome. So, some residents they buy guns, security systems go on the rise, and community watches are formed to people are also starting to like take dangerous tools out of their yard. Like
Hmm.
Johnny, I'm going to put the axe back, probably
Yeah.
put a little master lock on his shed. So nearly every house installed exterior lights and they set them to stay on just all night. So this place was lit up and they keep their keys too, their spare keys, no more spare keys. So like this community did take action. And I do think that's kind of what you do in these situations. Like you don't know who could be next. So
Well, and he doesn't have a clear victim profile,
no, it's
which is
totally random.
terrifying. And we talked about the different types of killers, and this to me is the unorganized type where he's just all over the place. There's no rhyme or reason. And that's even more scary because you never know who's next.
Absolutely. So while the neighborhood is kind of taking all these precautions, James feels unstoppable, and he decides the next house is going to be his biggest and worst attack yet. So here we go again, July 21st, 1990.
The suspect tried to break into this woman's Queen Anne apartment by coming through the living room window. What he hadn't anticipated is that she was sleeping on the sofa, her camera and other family members close by.
At that time, I said, "Get out of here." So I grabbed the camera, which is this, and handed it to Randy, turned on the flash, because it takes a minute to get going, and said, "Randy, go get a picture." My first thoughts when I saw him on the front porch, and after he had gone out of the window, I says, "Randy, get a photograph of this guy, because the Queen Anne axe murderer is still out on the loose, and they don't have anything on the guy."
Somebody just took the picture by surprise.
And where were you when they took the picture?
You told me I was in the yard. I was walking up the street. All of a sudden, surprise! The next thing I knew, a flash was in my eyeballs. Oh, I wanted to let you know that I took a picture, and I was about ready to cream the guy right then.
James disappears into the night, and the homeowner drives straight to the police station with this roll of film, slaps it on the desk, and is like, "Here's the Queen Anne axe murderer." So this is obviously a development. And see what I did there? Development?
Because developed the pictures.
Pretty good, huh? If you don't like dad jokes, you should find another podcast. So
Bye. I don't like dad jokes. I'm out.
shit. Now auditioning for our co-host.
Good luck, y'all. He is difficult to work with. What a diva.
So on September 13th, 1990, the crime lab is able to match finger and palm prints from Geneva McDonald's crime scene to fingerprints taken from the second axe that was found in the Durses' home. And that was the place that was littered with all the vulgarities.
Mm-hmm.
So, and those prints were linked to James Cushing because, remember that earlier arson conviction?
Ooh, they got him.
Yep, they always get him. So criminals, take note. So you will be caught. And I should mention that police had also had Mrs. Lewis, the woman who caught a glimpse of James through the window, pick him out it was like a photo lineup, and she's like, "That's the guy." So now we know James Cushing is the prime suspect, and there's a statewide manhunt for him. And James, meanwhile, is falling apart at the seams because he wanted that notoriety, but now that he's a suspect, he's legit out of options.
Mm-hmm.
Like he can't go home to mommy. He can't turn himself in. He can try to get into another local homeless shelter, but that's really about it.
I can't even imagine what's going on in his head at this point. Like the fact that he's got the mental health issues and he's clearly incapable of making rational decisions. His brain must have been pulling him into like 1,000 different directions. I mean, like, I get stressed out when I can't find my car keys. So, like, I can't imagine how he must be with all of that going on.
Yeah.
Like, and I feel like I'm a little bit more put together, you know?
I don't know, Melissa, if I would associate your name with put together, but like in this life or the next. But I do agree with you that James's emotions must have been kicked into overdrive at that point. I mean, he knows the walls are closing in. So police, while they're looking for James, stop by James's mother's place and basically say, "We think your son is the Queen Anne axe murderer, and we need to know where he is right now." Then she immediately collapses to the floor, like, "I don't believe it. You've got the wrong person." She doesn't want her son painted as this monster, but deep down, she knows it's true. She's seen what he's capable of, And people had warned her while he was bouncing between homes that this is what he could turn into. But that drives me nuts because if they're telling her this, why didn't they do something about it?
Again, this is just yet another classic example of the system failing.
And I don't often agree with you in these situations,
Ever.
but well, I mean, sometimes I do, but we differ greatly on some certain things. But in on this occasion, I completely agree. I feel like James exhibited this behavior so early and so often that there was plenty of time for someone to step in, but they didn't. And Geneva McDonald lost her life because of it. And that's the real tragedy. So many things are tragic about this, but someone did die and died horrifically through no fault of her own. So that very same night, September 13th, 1990, about 11:45, police are tipped off that James has been sighted at Steve's Broiler, which is it's kind of like this blue collar hole in the wall restaurant in downtown Seattle. And minutes later, squad cars swarm the building and police lure James outside and he gives up without incident. He doesn't put up a fight. In fact, when he's put in handcuffs, James says, "I don't know why you didn't arrest me sooner." So,
It's not the truth.
right.
I feel like he wanted so badly to be like Lizzie Borden, but he failed so miserably. Like, she attacked her parents. He terrorized a community, and like the one person he killed was totally random. Like, he didn't kill his parent. I mean, I'm glad, but still, it was like he had this vision of like what he wanted to be, and it just went totally off the rails. It just into chaos.
Absolutely. And I can only assume that was because of his kind of mental capacities. Like maybe he had these grand ideas in his head, but it manifested in a completely different way. And he was just doing what made him feel good at that point. So just like Lizzie Borden, though, James hoped his story would end with an acquittal. But unlike Lizzie, who I think made up her whole story to police, James chose to like tell police exactly what he did in great detail. And honestly, so bad move, but also it's just sad. James tells the detective, he's like, "I've been having problems with a prostitute, a couple of them, and I can identify them. And if they ever came after me again, I would hurt them." And the cop's like, "Same thing you did to Geneva?" And he goes, "Oh, I was just thinking about getting a gun and shooting them." He's saying it very nonchalant. So I mean, this guy had evil plans.
Yeah, he definitely did.
I think it's been kind of hard, Joe.
It has been hard. Mostly on me, because they don't know what to do with me, so they let me walk around the streets all night long. I sleep during the day.
People pick on you during the day?
Every
Jim, can I ask you something?
what?
When you hurt Geneva, or killed Geneva, and hurt the man up on the did you think that was a wrong thing to do?
At the time, I was so mixed up and so upset, I didn't know what I was thinking.
And at one point, the detective's like, "If I even interviewed you about all the bad things you've done, would you even remember them all?" And James is like, "There's just too much. I can't even remember." So these are just the things he got caught doing.
Wow.
And this to me is the most kind of haunting part of this whole interview. The detective at one point asks him, "If you were to think about anything that these people could have done to protect themselves from you, what would that have been?" And he goes, "Just lock your doors."
Oh, he makes it sound so simple, but he is also placing the blame on other people. Like, he's like, well, it's their fault because they didn't lock their door. No, idiot. It's your fault because you went into a house that's not yours with bad intentions. Like,
But it's horrifying, isn't it? Like, could you
it
imagine
is.
actually living like this in your own neighborhood? So people just getting whacked with axes and getting their homes broken into, especially if you have a family that you're trying to protect. Like, talk about being on edge 24/7. I cannot even imagine.
Mm-mm.
So ultimately, James Cushing is found competent to stand trial despite entering a not guilty by reasons of insanity plea. And I believe that that's because of the premeditation, I guess, that was involved in this whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, he willingly chose to break into those homes. He willingly planned to have a weapon with him. Like, I do think there was premeditation. He kept stealing the switchblades. He went back for the axe. Like, I feel like that's premeditation.
After a fairly lengthy trial in February of 1991, James Cushing is found guilty and convicted.
We, the jury, find the defendant James William Cushing guilty of the crime of burglary in the first degree as charged in count 1. We, the jury, find the defendant James William Cushing guilty of the crime of aggravated first-degree murder as charged in count 2.
I feel like during this whole trial, James was kind of just not there. Like, he wasn't even really aware of what was going on. And I'm not trying to sympathize with a killer. That'll never, ever happen. But when the verdict was announced, James turned to one of his attorneys and asked, "Does this mean we lost?"
Ugh.
And he was eventually sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
It doesn't feel like we really got justice in this case. And I don't know that prison was necessarily the right place for him. Like, I'm hoping while he was there, maybe he received mental health care and is still receiving it, but I kind of feel like maybe he should have been sent to like a mental health facility to get things under control and then gone to prison.
I'm sad for everyone involved because, like we talked about, people lost their lives, but also this guy, I feel like, could have been stopped years before all this.
Do we know anything about like where he is now?
I don't. Prison, I would guess. But I'm no prosecutor.
I'm going to Google James Cushing 2024.
Yeah. So that, my friend, is the story of James Cushing, a real-life horror story that's scarier than any slasher flick you'll watch this holiday season. So now that we've finished storytelling for October, we can reveal who our guest is going to be.
Yay!
Yeah, and if any of you true crimers out there are fans of the show Copycat Killers, which I tried to throw in a little nod there earlier, you'll be familiar with this person. And for those who don't know the show, Copycat Killers was a show that focused on real-life crimes that inspired Hollywood movies and vice versa. So just like we've been doing this whole block.
That show aired for several seasons. I'm surprised that there were that many cases that could like fit into that category, to be honest.
I completely agree. And having worked on the show a little bit, it was interesting to see the shows that some of them were loosely based and longer the seasons went on, the cases got more and more loosely based. So, but if you've ever watched Copycat Killers, you'll know that they had a recurring psychologist appear, someone who reviewed cases and weighed in on the killer's mindset, how things in someone's personal life might have caused them to do the things they did or act out the way they did. And his name was Dr. Buzz von Ornsteiner. And I'm proud to announce that Dr. Buzz will be joining us next week for a conversation about his career, his time spent working on Copycat Killers, and also some tips about how to rebound from trauma, which is something that we've been talking about in the past. I don't know, the last block was more about that survival trauma, but he's got some really good tips on that too. So it should be a very entertaining and enlightening conversation, and I am thrilled that we get to share it with you all.
Yeah, that's going to be a great interview. I can't wait to talk to him. I have so many questions about serial killers and like their brains.
He's the guy to ask.
Good. Well, I'm excited. And everybody, I suggest you go on and watch Reels and watch the Slender Man and the Lizzie Borden episode. And if you have anything to say about it, let us know. You can hit us up on our socials at Murder Unscripted. You could email us at murderunscriptedpod@gmail.com. Or you can send us a note through our website, www.murderunscriptedpod.com.
It's true. Those are the places.
Those are the places. Sorry. I'm so awkward and I don't know what to do, and then I just laugh because I don't know what else to do. And it's like an awkward laugh. Well, until next week, remember, lock your damn doors, lock up your axes, keep your porch lights on, don't get killed, and remember, perverts don't wear signs that say they're perverts.
I can't wait till my kids go trick-or-treating so I can perv on all their Halloween candy.
Isn't that our word last week?
I'm using it all the time now. Whenever I look at anything now, I'm gonna perv it. I'm gonna perv at it hard.
You are a perv.